But let's talk a little bit about careers for women in construction. Then I see a lot of great groups on LinkedIn promoting that. We hear a lot of it in the media. But through education, your educational piece and your career over the last number of years, how was it for you in terms of the numbers working? Was it majority female, majority male? Is it a good 50-50 split? What's your experiences over the last 7 or 8 years?
So my own experience was when I did my degree, there wasn't that many women on the course. I can't remember the numbers exactly, but there was less of us than there was the guys. So starting off from uni, it wasn't very many women doing it. And then when I went into the workplace, I think at that point there was starting to be a bit more, but still it depends on what grade as well, because if you're starting off as a graduate, there might be more of a gender balance. It's more as you go and progress towards other levels. So if I remember my cohort, we had like 400 graduates when we started in my year of my company's graduate scheme at the time. And there was definitely a bit of a balance, but by the time I was, I'm trying to think, by the time I was a senior QS, the other cohorts of graduates that were coming in, it was still very balanced. To be fair with that, I think my particular company that I was working for were trying to make sure that they could recruit lots of people and have that gender balance. The challenge comes in, I think, from having seen the actual experiences of people, whether they stay in the industry or not. And I feel like I became, not that I'm a statistic, but having sort of made that career pivot is kind of feeding into those stats of some people don't end up staying in the industry. So even if, some people might leave before they get chartered, or some people they'll get chartered and then go to pastures new. So you see with, there's a lot of different quantity surveyors out there, I think, who end up doing different things, developers, businesses, whatever. So from that perspective, I think that there's something to be said of keeping women in the industry once they come in, because the retention is not as great as it should be. And there's a number of factors that have impacted why people would choose to leave. And some people have quite adverse experiences in the industry, experiencing sexism and experiencing just very challenging working environments. So everyone has a different story, but that retention piece is very challenging. And maternity stuff as well. People, some people come back from maternity leave and then end up trying to do like part-time but end up doing full-time. Like you see it kind of played out with different people of like they're just struggling to stay.
Like a friend of mine in Denmark who said if we can solve the challenge with childcare at home, we'll solve the challenge in the business. And I think again Denmark it's very good in that sense. It really focuses on how do we plan the family, and if we can plan around the family, we can plan around then everything else in our life. It's an interesting way to look at it. But no, I was going to say that what I was noticing, if we went back in, again, I'm reflecting back when I was a young graduate coming out, the construction industry was really looked at a very laborious type industry, like especially the trades, the block layer, the plaster. It's very kind of labour intensive and intense on the body, I would say. But over the years, I guess we're now transitioning the industry. It's becoming an awful lot more consultancy and advisory and so on. I can see that, again, I reflect on Denmark purely because of my knowledge and experience there, is that the majority of the consultancy over there, it's a nice dynamic in terms of the balance between male and female, which I found interesting coming from Ireland, coming out of a contracting, the contractor side, which is very male orientated, at least the companies I was working in at the time. And it got me thinking that because we're now transitioning and we're moving into a lot of that consultancy and now the digitization and the technology stuff, that it's not as labor as intensive as it used to be. And the diversification can be kind of much more introduced, I would say.
I think you've just reminded me of that point. So I was working in a consultancy which generally was more friendly for women to work in. So if you think of the number of women that would have been they went down the contractor route as a quantity surveyor versus the consultancy route. I think a lot of people do end up choosing the consultancy route. So you will find more of a balance. And even things like, being on a more site-based contractor side role, there might be, some more laddie behavior, if we can call it that. Whereas I've often found like being in a consultancy setting, people are definitely a lot more professional. So it makes it much easier to be in that environment.
Yeah, you can imagine that we're still a very archaic type business, aren't we? In construction, we haven't really transitioned like other industries yet. We're still starting from a very low base. Our culture being one of them, but obviously digitization, as we're talking about. So that transition in culture is also necessary for us in order to be able to have more diversification and allowing people to come in comfortably. Like I think there's stigmas around the industry that people don't enter it. They don't. I think we look at it, the construction as not being a fancy industry to be involved in. It's much better to be involved in other sectors than it is to be for construction.
Yeah.
But the opportunities in it, as we mentioned earlier on, they're kind of global. Like you can do a whole pile in construction.
Yeah, I've got a point on that one. So in terms of what people's perception is of the industry, we typically talk about, it's people might think it's a dirty industry. It's hard hats.
Yeah.
But I think parents will have a role to play as well as to how their children perceive it. And I think people will think, oh, my child works in construction, but they don't realize the opportunities. I mean, if we talk about quantity surveying from a pay perspective alone, it's a very great industry to be in. And I think people don't see that because perhaps we're used to more traditional roles. I mean, going back to my own sort of background, people in certain communities might not even have something like quantity surveying on the radar. They think my child should be an accountant, a doctor, a lawyer. So that would never even be on their radar. So I've done a few projects of like promoting construction to women to try and, raise awareness of what the career prospects are.